The U.S. is in active pursuit of a third oil tanker near Venezuela, according to the Reuters news agency. Now, on Saturday, the U.S. Coast Guard seized a vessel suspected of carrying oil subject to U.S. sanctions. Caracas condemned the seizure as a violation of international law, saying it would file a complaint with the UN Security Council. The U.S. has imposed a blockade of sanctioned tankers entering and leaving Venezuela and has increased its military presence in the region to combat alleged drug trafficking. Now, Mary Ellen O'Connell is an expert on international law with the University of Notre Dame in the U.S. She told me on what legal grounds a state can seize a foreign oil tanker in international waters.
Well, there are a few legal grounds, but none of them appear to be present in this case. An oil tanker that is engaged in some kind. Honestly, it's difficult to imagine an oil tanker involved in criminality, in the kind of piracy or slave trading that any ship could stop another vessel and prevent that kind of action. But obviously that's not happening here. Oil tankers are huge, carrying massive quantities of oil, and they don't engage in that kind of petty criminality, which is sanctioned under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. As far as we can tell, President Trump has no legal basis for seizing these ships. Right. He has said, as you just mentioned, it's got something to do with drug trafficking.
All right, Mary Ellen O'Connell, expert on international law with the University of Notre Dame in the U.S.
And joining me to shed some light on this is DW's Oscar Schlenker, who reported for many years from Venezuela and who is now monitoring events from Berlin. Oscar, good to have you with us. So let's start with how Maduro and Venezuelan officials are reacting to this latest interdiction of an oil tanker by the United States.
Well, Maduro's administration obviously rejects these actions. They have called it piracy and theft. They have accused the U.S. government of illegally stealing these tankers and disappearing its crew. Now, they've tried to move different mechanisms in the United Nations to protest these actions and threats from Donald Trump. Maduro has also tried to play up his alliance with Russia, China, and Iran, who have in turn voiced their disapproval of a U.S. invasion in Venezuela, but have kept it at a diplomatic level, especially coming from China. But what we have seen is Maduro's rhetoric is more defiant than in the past weeks.
Now, you just mentioned the word invasion. Donald Trump, of course, accused the Maduro regime of using oil revenue to finance narco-terrorism. How founded are these claims? Or is there perhaps more to it?
Well, investigative journalists in Venezuela and abroad have been making these accusations for years now. There is a lot of evidence that shows how Maduro's regime is involved with international criminal organizations. And well, Venezuelan oil does finance his regime. The biggest evidence is that these tankers that have been seized are part of a ghost fleet. They navigate with flags from other countries. They use altered navigation systems to bypass these U.S. sanctions. So they are already operating under circumstances. Are Russian tankers and Iranian and Chinese tankers as well. However, those tankers from these countries are not being seized. The issue with Venezuela has hardly to do with drugs or even oil for that matter. Many experts and the Trump administration as well have hinted at regime change and for Maduro to step down from what most countries consider a dictatorship. So these operations seek to increase pressure on Maduro and justify it by going after these illegal schemes that are somehow tied to the Venezuelan regime.
And Oscar, what effect is the U.S. naval blockade already having on the country?
Well, it's going to have a huge effect on the country and on everyday Venezuelans. Much of Venezuela's crude oil needs to be refined outside Venezuela. And there are some regions like the Margarita Island where gas shortages are already affecting the island state. Long lines of cars and gas shortages can be expected in other parts of the country as well. But I think the biggest effect will come with an economic crisis and a resurgence of hyperinflation that affects everybody in the country in the coming year.
You already mentioned the US probably being interested in a regime change. Do you think that the conflict could escalate any further?
I definitely think the conflict will escalate. I think it will escalate slowly. I think the U.S. government is doing everything it can not to invade Venezuela, but to increase pressure at sea. However, it has risen eyebrows in the region. Recently, Mercosur held their summit, and Venezuela was a divisive factor between Argentina and Brazil on the U.S. and Venezuelan conflict. So I think the conflict will increase, and it is affecting the whole region.
All right, DW's Oscar Schlenker there on the situation in Venezuela. Oscar, thank you so very much.
Thank you.